These aren't the stories your mother told you. No, these are the other stories.
Today's episode of The Other Stories is Hope Without an Object, written by D.C Hill and narrated by Alexandra Elroy.
Dusk caresses the mountains spread across the horizon. Below, the forest waits for darkness. No one else for miles. This is what passes for normal here at Stonehouse Fire Tower. This is exactly how Evelyn Broussard wants it. The end is coming. She always knew it would. At least this way she has a hell of a view. God damn, Evelyn mutters to herself, smiling at the view. She thinks of Flanders, of needle and thread, blood and sawdust. She remembers the men she saved and the men she couldn't. She tries to forget the follies of the bottle that accompanied her home and the lonely road it had led her down, one paved with desperation. In the fading warmth of the setting sun, she can pretend, if only for a moment, that the ritual, the cult and her descent into depravity had never happened. She could tell herself her shattered ego had never been stoked by men who had said she was important. Men who had told her she would be the mother of a new century, of something magnificent. Unmoored and grasping, she had believed them. Evelyn had lived a life of luxury then, her body clean of the vices that had previously haunted her. The cult provided, and she wanted for nothing. She had told herself the rituals were frivolous things of a bygone age. She was comfortable. She had switched one intoxicant for another. Soon, she had felt life grow inside her. It felt purifying, the despair from her old life burnt away by the promise of the future. Then, one crisp March morning, she had woken. Amid a circular glade in a dark forest, familiar faces standing around her in a circle. The thing inside her, whatever it had been, was gone. She had served her purpose, the gathered men had told her. Despite the cult's best efforts, Evelyn had escaped with her life. She had been running ever since. 20 years. Every shelter, every friend made, every small town and big city fell away under the weight of Evelyn's past. The cult always found her. Attachments became just another avenue of attack. She retreated and refined, cutting away the ties that bound her with each subsequent escape. It was a lonely life. But it was life, she told herself. Stonehouse Tower, built by the PWA, built by men from the very same war, seemed to be the answer. Here, in the wilderness, she was alone. The fire tower and the radio are her only link to others. Beauty surrounds her. She observes and reports. She feels useful. She is grateful to serve a purpose, but knows it cannot last. More than anything, she is tired. Ever since that March morning in the glade, Evelyn has been able to sense the despair of those around her. Whatever she had carried had attuned her to a frequency mortal men were not privy to. She could reach out for that despair, touch it, taste it. Over time, she has learned to shape it, even wield it. She once killed a drunken brigand in Arkansas by turning his own self-loathing into a dagger of pure light. It had mesmerized her, even as the contents of the man's jugular had spilled across the floor of the toilet stall. This sense, this skill and curse, is how she knows the cult has found her again. The men in the cult had allowed their misery and grief to twist their souls into sordid shapes. It had changed them forever, cursing them to lust after power and prestige they had never earned. She can sense these nameless, broken men getting closer and closer. Evelyn watches the sun near the mountain's clutches as she finishes her descent of the tower. She adjusts the strap of the rifle slung over her shoulder as she tips the dregs of her cocoa into the grass. As she navigates the last few steps from the tower, something moves at the edges of her vision, just inside the nearby forest. Animals often venture close to the tower, curious at the light and smells. This is different. The shape had moved with weight and purpose. Evelyn is being watched. "Might as well come out. I know you're there," she says. She stares into the forest. Too dark. Can't see a damn thing. A twig snaps somewhere in the mass of trees. Part of her wishes for the sound of a gun and a quick end. Instead, she hears the sound of someone running away. She sighs and takes off in pursuit. The forest already looks alien, the sun fading quickly. Evelyn sees her quarry ahead, a tall figure between the trees. She glances at her rifle and checks the grip. When she looks up, the figure is gone. She crouches and presses herself against the trunk of a nearby tree. She closes her eyes and tries to filter out the noise of everything that belongs. Her surroundings vanish. Guilt simmers. Evelyn's contacts had told her the cult had grown bolder these last few years. They had entangled themselves in the mundane fabric of the everyday: police, military, local and national politics. A man at every level for every kind of dirty job. Not only that, but women were going missing. Young women lost in the cracks and folds of society. Sacrifices, she had been told. Food for something with an endless appetite for misery and despair. Something she had spawned. She used to tell herself it wasn't her fault. Years of running and paranoia had told her it definitely was. In the forest, she opens her eyes. Only darkness greets her. She thinks she sees the same figure up ahead, trying to ebb away into the depths of the forests. She is not scared of this man or his kin, despite the odds. There are more of them than her. It has always been this way. But something is different this time. She senses something other than their usual anguish. Something sits below this man's fear and self-loathing. It's an absence, a pulsating void. There is no form or structure to it. It feels cold and pure, familiar. Evelyn quells her doubts and moves toward the figure, closing the gap. It feels good to be on the attack. She feels the man's anguish rising like bile. She manifests the man's desperation as a studded mace. It weighs nothing and is darker than shadow. The figure stops and turns. Has he heard her? Evelyn runs the last few yards and strikes the man with the mace, the question ceasing to matter. She does not stop hitting the man until he is still. His protest fueling her fury until he falls silent. The mace vanishes. Like him, the man's despair has ceased to be. It had been a man in his late 30s, dressed in clothes like he was going for a hike. A small knapsack on his back had split in the carnage, spilling food and some supplies over the forest floor. Evil was banal, Evelyn thought. Grey, boring men you wouldn't look twice at in a lineup. Evelyn runs a hand across the man's head. Blood, warm and wet, covers his temple. Her fingers brush over his skull, across puckered flesh and the sharp edges of broken bone. She tries to forget her sorrows and rises to her feet. She leaves the body where it lies. She can sense the others in the darkness approaching. Lots of them. But beneath their hatred, that same cold void pulses and simmers. It takes Evelyn back to where this all began, to the darkness they had forced her to carry before they ripped it from her and cast her aside. Her child, whatever it was that had grown inside her, was in this forest. Why had they brought it here? No, She realizes it had brought them here. A reunion. Evelyn does what she has always done. She runs. She smells the smoke and the fire before she even gets back to the tower. At the top of the tower, she is greeted by Bedlam. Fire on the horizon. The forests are coming quickly. This is why they're here. Why it's here, she thinks. To destroy the last good thing she has. To burn her out. Evelyn enters the hut atop the tower before realizing she had locked the door earlier. The radio lies smashed on the floor. Her belongings and the few bits of furniture are scattered there too. No one will be coming to save her. But the forest catches in her brain pan. Every bit of wildlife and beauty that had sustained her these last few months will be gone, she thinks. The way the pines swayed when the wind drifted over the mountains. The reassuring sound of streams in full flow, water clear as glass, birdsong at dawn. Nothing left. She walks back outside the hut in a daze. The forest seems to creak and groan as trees begin to collapse, as the fires claim them. In the flickering light of the approaching chaos, she can just make out a bronze plaque set into the railings outside the hut door. She had forgotten its message. Stonehouse Tower, built 1933 by the tireless men of the PWA. Work without hope draws a nectar in a sieve, and hope without an object cannot live. A plan forms. She strides back into the hut and takes 2 clips of ammunition from inside a hidden compartment beneath her bed. She stuffs them into her pockets. She walks out of the hut. Figures approach. Their hatred begins to seep away, replaced by the cold void in her child's heart. It's close now. The first man breaks from the tree line and runs towards the base of the tower. She raises her rifle and fires. The man's head snaps back and he falls. 2 more run from the forest undeterred. She thinks of a life spent running, of lovers and friends that never had a chance. She grits her teeth and fires off 2 more rounds. 2 more men join their brethren in the mud. Still more come. She touches the railing to steady herself and her aim. A familiar energy runs through her. Despair. She pulls her hand away as she hears shouts of panic from below. The men below her are scared. She even tastes it a little before her child, her spawn, makes itself known again. It feels like ice water lapping at her feet. The men feel it too. They rally, and more emerge from the forest. Evelyn steadies and fires. Evelyn feels the forest burning. The heat is unbearable. Guilt lies heavy in her heart. This thing she had brought into the world had caused this. What else had it left in its wake on its way to meet her? Her rifle finally runs dry, every bullet having found a permanent home. Bullet casings lie at her feet. Her offspring awaits. For a second it remains unmoved at the death of the men it had brought here and the inferno at its back. But then Evelyn feels a flicker of anger, wild and noisy. Temper. Evelyn drops the rifle. More men rush from the trees, a few of them already on the stairs climbing towards her. She looks to the horizon and sees beauty consumed by destruction. Evelyn hears a noise coming from the forest. Whispers, shrieks. A joy-filled choir, laughter, tears, all laid upon each other. The forest begins to turn in on itself. The ground folds and churns as the surface of reality warps around something gigantic and unseen. The men have stopped, warned away by their master. They peer upward at the woman who continues to defy them. Evelyn reaches out and touches the plaque, the trap laid. Her back arches and her body pulses and thrums. Evelyn grips the guardrail, closes her eyes, and focuses. She feels the horrors in the hearts of the men who had built this tower, men fresh from those same churned, crater-filled fields of Europe. Men searching for purpose beyond the death and destruction they had wrought and witnessed. She feels their uncertainty at all that lay ahead, and their hope that redemption could be theirs for the taking. They had put it all, every shred of despair, into this frame of steel and timber. Evelyn focuses on it all, drawing it into herself. Her body straightens, shakes and shimmers with all it contains. She opens her eyes to see the impossible visage of her child before her. She opens her mouth to scream, to spit blood and curse at her misfortune. Instead, she laughs. Letting go of an epoch's worth of despair, everything goes black. Hope finally searing through the guilt in her heart. Here, at the end.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Other Stories. Hope Without an Object was written by D.C Hill, narrated by Alexandra Elroy, produced by Carl Hughes, with music by Fat Frog Studio and Tom Robson. The sound effects provided by freesound.org. The episode illustration was provided by Luke Spoon of Carry On House. A quick thanks to our community managers, Jasmine Arch, Joshua Boucher, and his eyeless ones, Mary Pastrano and Cody Czarzasty, and to Joshua Boucher for helping with our submission reading. And of course to Ben Errington for the ongoing explosion of content he fires out of his social media canon. D.C Hill is the author of several short stories and the pseudonymous mask of Dan Hill, editor and writer of numerous comic book tales. You can find him online by chanting his name backwards while staring into a mirror. Alexandra is a bilingual voice actress and writer who lives in the Netherlands. She loves everything to do with stories, especially creative and playful horror. Her favourite voices to do are witches, goblins, and crazy computers. When she's not voicing, writing, or mummying, she directs plays that she adapted from classic novels such as Pride and Prejudice, Death on the Nile, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The Other Stories is a production of the Story Studio Hawk and Cleaver and is brought to you with a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. That means don't change it, don't sell it, but by all means share the hell out of it. Until next time.